And it looks like Howie Hawkins is here. So we're going to go ahead and bring him in. Hello, Mr. Hawkins. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. You're coming in just fine. So welcome to the show. We're live now. I'm just bringing you in here because the stream's been going on. Thank you so much for joining us. And everybody, please welcome to the show Mr. Howie Hawkins. He is a candidate for president over in the Green Party. And we're going to be talking about some things. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, you know, a couple of my listeners have been submitting some topics that they want us to talk about. We'll start with some policy stuff, and then we'll get a little more general as to the future for the Green Party and what have you. So let's start with, you know, a kind of big milestone. So you've talked a lot about a Green New Deal. The Green New Deal has kind of become front and center in our political conversations. A lot of that is thanks to the Green Party. But how does your Green New Deal differ from Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal or the Green New Deal that you hear about from the Democrats?
Well, first of all, Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal is an order of magnitude better and more committed than any of the other Democrats. I mean, I did an article about this in the fall, and I looked at these programs. None of the other Democrats were serious at all. They were not making real public investments. To the extent they were, it was tax subsidies and tax breaks. Bernie's was $16.3 trillion over 10 years, with a goal of getting to zero carbon emissions by 2050. Zero carbon emissions in the transportation and power sectors by 2030, but the rest by 2050. And the Green New Deal that I've been talking about, I was the first candidate to campaign for a Green New Deal in this country in 2010, running for governor of New York. And what I put out for this campaign is what we call the eco-socialist Green New Deal. It's actually $27.5 trillion over 10 years. And when we looked at Bernie's numbers, we think his numbers are good for what he's trying to do. He's just on a longer timeline. The other difference between what he is proposing and what I am proposing is that he just wants to take over the power sector, power production, electric power production. We want to take over the whole energy sector. We want to take over the Exxons and the Koch industries, who are not going to reinvest their fossil fuel profits in renewables. We're going to use some fossil fuels in the transition. We should use those earnings to invest in renewables. So we should nationalize on a democratic basis the fuel industry, the oil and gas industry, as well as power production. We also need to have a public transportation corporation dealing with railroads and airlines. Airlines are cheap right now. We should buy them up now, but Trump's not going to do that. But we need to coordinate our rail system with our air transportation system so that we can replace a lot of the air traffic for short and intermediate routes with high-speed bullet trains. We need to convert the rail, freight rail system to electricity, electric power, and densify it so that we're not so dependent on trucks on roads. And then we need to rebuild the trolley systems, the light rail systems that every city in this country had between the 1890s and the 1930s. I mean, everywhere I've campaigned until this coronavirus shut down, there was traffic jams, and that's inexcusable. So we need to take over the transportation sector. And then finally, manufacturing. If we're going to build this rail system, if we're going to build solar and wind generation, heat pumps so we can heat and cool our buildings without gas and oil, we need to rebuild our manufacturing. We hardly have a machine tool industry left in this country, and that's what you need to build other manufacturing equipment for intermediate goods and consumer goods. So we got to start there. So we want to see a Green New Deal factory in every city, and they'll be on a different basis, on a clean technology, zero waste. Well, instead of making steel with coke ovens, we make them with electric arc furnaces. But we need to do this through the public sector. The steel industry is already moving that way, but they want to wear out their coke ovens before they replace them. And then cement, that's 5% of the world's carbon footprint, because you put calcium carbonate in the cement, you heat it up, the calcium hardens it, and the carbon goes into the atmosphere. There are other ways of making cement. We got to scale that up. Plastics is a big crisis, you know, an environmental problem aside from climate change. We can make biodegradable plastics with agricultural feedstocks. And what we're planning now is all this oil and gas, well, oil or gas drilling primarily, in, say, Pennsylvania, and they're going to build a big petrochemical plastics complex in Appalachia, in the Ohio Valley. And that is an environmental disaster in itself. So what I'm saying is we need to do what we did during World War II, when the federal government took over or built a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the country in order to turn industry on a dime into what they called the arsenal of democracy, which armed the US, the UK, Russia to defeat the Nazis. And we need to do nothing less to defeat climate change. So that is where I go beyond Bernie on a faster timeline, more through the public sector. And I just want to say that the rest of the stuff we're hearing from the Democrats, they took the Green New Deal, which was the signature issue for the Green Party over the last decade, and they took the brand and watered down the content. That non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal that AOC and Markey put into Congress, it dropped the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure. It dropped the phase out of nuclear power. It dropped the big cuts in military spending to put into the Green New Deal, and it extended the deadline to 2050. And then Pelosi won't even let them vote on it. And when McConnell said, well, we'll let you vote on it because we want all you senators running for president to go on a record, Schumer said it was a trick and told them all to vote present, which they did, except the 4 Democrats that voted with the Republicans no on the Green New Deal. So, you know, my argument is if you want to see a Green New Deal, at this point, it looks like the Green Party is your only option.
So you covered a lot of ground there, but there's a couple specifics I wanted to get into. You know, first of all, I know that you know, fracking is a big thing that we needed to stop yesterday, and you know, I have some personal attachment to this too because I'm actually from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania originally, and when I was in grad school, I did a media ecology study on kind of the fracking industry, and you know, I mean, they had 2,800 environmental regulations that just went not reported at all. Just no one talked about it, just went under the radar. We never did the proper homework about this stuff. It is grossly unsafe. It is not helping our domestic energy needs at all because it's just, I mean, it's holding on to a model that should be in the past and should have been in the past years ago. And it's we're shipping all this energy other places anyway. So all it's doing is padding CEOs' pockets. So yeah, fracking ban is absolutely necessary. But you mentioned rail. Do you have a plan for an extensive United States rail system? Because that's something that they started talking about a little while back because everyone's like, oh, well, our country, I just can't imagine that. And it's like, well, yeah, you can because we used to have it. We used to have it. Now we just do a new version of that. It's far from impossible. So do you have anything like specific to that?
Well, in the Eco-Socialist Green New Deal, which is on our website, it's a budget. And we cost out what we need to build in terms of the number of jobs it would create and the amount of carbon it would save. And we have a whole discussion there about how to build this system out and what it'll cost. So we're talking about, you know, most of our freight transportation being on rails, and then the final, you know, distribution of those goods would be electrified vehicles, you know, from hubs to stores for final consumers. And then in terms of the intercity transportation, we want to build high-speed rails like every other advanced country has. I mean, it's not a technological problem. It's a problem of politics and will. And then the trolley systems, you know, we could probably do better than we did now. You could put them with lightweight. You can put them above the existing streets so you don't disrupt the streets with, you know, rails right on the streets. And you have these little pod cars and they can be, you know, you can order your ride and it'll be like, you know, a little gondola on a ski lift and it'll just whisk you off to where you want to go on this thing that's above the roads. I mean, that's an option, but the point is to have a mass transit system that is a public good that we use collectively and minimizes the need for personal cars. In fact, if we build that kind of transportation system, if you need a personal car, you know, because you want to go out in the country or you got something to haul that you can't put in the public transportation, you know, that can be rented. And that itself could be a public utility so that, you know, your municipal or your metropolitan transportation authority has those vehicles available for rent.
So just as like a for instance here, so you know, I was a road comic for a really long time, and I still tour a good bit, but mostly I go to cities now. But back in the day, you know, a lot of your gigs early on, they're in, you know, smaller cities and smaller markets. You're trying to build a name for yourself and whatnot. So in this kind of futuristic scenario, would I be in a situation where, say, you know, say I live in, you know, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I have a show in, you know, some small little town in Ohio, you know, 40 minutes outside of Cleveland or whatever. Could I feasibly take a train to, you know, the stop closest to that, and then there would be some type of public car sharing program where I could take a car to my show and then drive back and then take the train back home?
Yeah. And that would be more convenient than, you know, getting a car for a long drive or flying and trying to get whatever gear you got to take with you for your show. You know, make sure you get it. You know, I lost some baggage a couple of times on the campaign so far. So, and it should be quicker. I mean, going through all the security at the airports, they want you to get there 2 hours early. There are delays. It's a lot easier to go to your local light rail system and take that to the station for the big trains that'll do the long hauls, the high-speed trains, and then do the same when you get to your destination.
So where do you stand? Are you for a federal jobs guarantee?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is that
if you're willing and able to work, you should be able to do that. I mean, we have a work ethic in this society. It's part of your self-respect and pulling your weight in society. And, you know, I worked in construction before I was a Teamster. And I think the most frustrating times in my life were when there was a, you know, recession in the construction industry and there was no work. And you want to work, but you can't even find work. And it's, so there should be jobs on the shelf, like the old Works Progress Administration, where local communities would plan public works and public services. And when you're unemployed, instead of going to the unemployment office, you can go to the employment office and say, I want my job. And the local community will have planned services or public works projects that you could work on. And they would be funded. The way they did it during the Works Progress Administration is 10% local funding. So that's just to give local buy-in and avoid boondoggles, and 90% federal funding. And there's no reason, there's so much work to do. I mean, from caring for, you know, kids after school or elderly people that are isolated, you know, that kind of care work, to, you know, rebuilding our sewers and water systems, upgrading our parks, public buildings. I mean, there's so much we need to do, not to mention all the green technology we need to go to clean energy, avoid climate crisis, and also deal with these other environmental problems.
So you've been one of the things your campaign sent me was you've been pretty outspoken about what's happening right now with the coronavirus and the need for Medicare for all. So go ahead and unpack where you're at there.
Well, the immediate thing we need to do is, through the Medicare system, which already exists, it should pay for coronavirus treatment. It is paying. The government said they will pay for tests, as I understand it, but the treatment is an average of $35,000. And that's going to hurt a lot of people. 87 million of us either don't have insurance, or our insurance is so crappy that we don't want to use it because the deductibles and the copays, or, you know, out of network or uncovered services, it's just too expensive. So people are avoiding to see if they've got it and get treated if they do, which is a public health issue. So Medicare should pay for that right now. And then we have this huge problem with getting medical supplies to where they're needed. And Trump he's such a bumbling idiot. You know, he has the Defense Production Act. He should bring in the military and industry who know how to handle supply management and find out what's needed where, who can produce it, and organize that and get it done. I mean, we got all the states bidding against each other, and FEMA's bidding, and, you know, the people that do have this stuff are making out like bandits. That should be a public project. It should be federally managed. Like, you know, I mentioned World War II. That was the Office of War Mobilization. We need a similar office in the federal government right now. Of course, yesterday the rent was due. I think there should be a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. We need a forbearance program where people can tell their landlords and their utilities that, you know, they lost their job, they don't have enough income, and either make a partial payment or no payment, and, you know, no consequences for that. When we get to the other end, then to make up the difference between what was paid and what wasn't, there should be a progressive relief program. So low and moderate income people get help covering the difference of what they missed. And, you know, then see, I don't want to just say nobody pay any rent or utility bills, because that'll start a string of bankruptcies through the landlords, utilities, the governments depend on their revenues, the banks, and we'll be in a worse economic plight than we are right now, which is just a production shutdown. That would create a financial crisis and the disorganization of businesses that we want to get back up running when we get to the other end of this. And then we should have federal rent control. I keep hearing reports of landlords using this situation to jack up the rent when people are vulnerable. And if they don't pay that rent, they push them out because they want to gentrify their buildings. It's a big problem, particularly in New York City, but in a lot of cities. And so we had federal rent control during World War II. Now is the time for that, given this emergency. And then finally, we had a housing crisis before this started. We had nearly 8 million low-income people who could not find affordable housing. We had a quarter of the population paying more than 50% of their income for housing. And the affordable standard of the federal government is 30% of income. Half the people were paying more than that. So we had a shortage of affordable housing because the private housing market will not produce affordable housing. The developers and the landlords geared to the upscale market. That's where they can make money. So that's why we should have public housing, but we need to do it right this time. Instead of it being segregated housing for poor people, we should do like they do in Europe. It's open to everybody, professionals, blue-collar working class, as well as low-income people. And they live in the same developments and they're high quality. And we need that because we've had race and class segregation growing in this country for decades. So it mitigate segregation as well as provide affordable housing. It can be a clean energy program because we can build these to be powered by clean energy, to be energy efficient. And it would obviously be a jobs program. So I think this is something we need to do anyway. And to come out of this coronavirus depression, that's an obvious way to get America back to work again.
Would you be for a rent strike if there was a complete mortgage freeze as well, though? Because, I mean, you know, the way I see it, the banks have already gotten trillions. They've just gotten trillions, and they've gotten handout after handout after handout. So there's no reason why I think anyone should have to pay rent right now to a landlord who then pays it back to the bank. There should just be a freeze on all that stuff because they've already gotten handout after handout. If there were such a thing, would you support a rent strike?
Yeah, I actually put out a statement yesterday supporting the rent strikes that are going on for demands for a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures, for a mortgage and utility and rent forbearance program, and these other programs. Although I caution that people shouldn't just assume they can just go off by themselves on a rent strike. They can still be evicted. A rent strike has to be well organized. People have to be in solidarity so they're effective in protecting the tenants who are on their strikes. But, you know, a lot of people are looking at that. Even corporate tenants like Subway and the Cheesecake Factory, they're not paying their rent this month.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get to the second part then, as far as healthcare. So getting back to kind of your campaign and your policy platform, what is your healthcare plan?
Well, I'm for Medicare for all. I'm for immediately doing what the Medicare for all plans before the Congress do, and that is set up a national health insurance system where a single public payer covers all medically necessary services for everybody in the United States. But I want to go beyond that. I want to go to a fully democratic and socialized healthcare system that covers not just who pays for the services, but how the services are delivered. So I want to move over 10 years to a national health service where the hospitals and clinics are publicly owned, where the doctors and nurses and other healthcare providers are public servants on salary, and the whole system is governed by a federation of locally elected health boards, 1/3 elected by the healthcare workers, 2/3 by the public. And I think that's a better system because if you just have the national health insurance, the drug companies and the healthcare providers who are trying to maximize their income will just be feeding at the public trough, and it won't be as effective at controlling costs. And also, when I call for the local health boards, that makes the system accountable so that we get clinics in every neighborhood, not just the neighborhoods with the higher incomes where providers seeking to maximize their income are more likely to locate. So we can rationally allocate resources. Like with hospitals now competing with each other for clients, we have an excess sometimes of MRIs, but we don't have a clinic in the poor neighborhood where people, you know, I can tell you right here in Syracuse, if you're from the inner city and you want to get a doctor's appointment in the suburbs, a lot of times as soon as they get their address, they say, oh, we're not taking new clients. And we got problems like that. So that's why we need a healthcare system that is accountable to the people and democratic. So I want to go immediately to national health insurance and then out over 10 years, build out a full national health service like the UK has, like Italy has, like Costa Rica has, like Cuba has.
Like France has, like, I mean, you know, the list just goes on and on. It's,
well, some of them just have national health insurance, what we call single payer.
Right.
Where the doctors are, you know, private and the hospitals are private. Usually, most systems are mixed, but the private sector's bigger. And, you know, Italy does have a national health service, but one of the reasons they're having trouble right now and they're short, they have less beds than they used to is because they went through these reforms where they try to set competition between the private in the public sector. Everybody had access to the public sector healthcare system, but the private system was competing. So everybody had to pare down their capacity. And now when they need that capacity that's gone, they're in trouble.
Well, it's just such a basic notion that when you have a system set up, you know, just stripping it down to its barest essentials, you know, pretty much every other industrialized country except for us has a national system where everybody is covered and you don't see medical bankruptcies. It's just not a thing. I mean, Billy Bragg, whenever he tours the United States, he just lays it out. He's like, you guys still have medical bankruptcies in your country. We figured that out. I'm not saying it's perfect in England. We still got our issues. Everyone does. But we figured that out. That's not something that happens where I live. That's what he says, and he's right. And but when you have a system that's just set up for profit above all else, whenever there's any kind of pandemic, you're just not going to be set up for it. You're just not set up to deal with that. So you're naturally going to fail and fail miserably, as we're seeing right now.
And we've been warned about this for decades. The public health officials have said, we need to be prepared for a pandemic, and we need the equipment, the hospital beds, the capacity. And the other thing going on is we have big pharma. 15 of the 18 largest drug companies do not do research and development of vaccines, antivirals, and antibiotics. And we are facing drug-resistant bacteria, so we need new antibiotics. And that research is not being done by these drug companies that turn around and charge us 10 times more than we would pay in Canada for the same drugs.
Well, because that's where their energy is going. Their energy isn't going into research and development. Their energy is going into evergreening and all these unethical business practice, which evergreening, by the way, for everyone listening, that's basically a thing where you kind of are able to renew a patent because you change the color of a pill or something like that so that the drug stays unaffordable for people and you can maximize your profits. That's where they spend all their energy.
Right. Well, I'm saying the drug companies should be part of this National Health Service. They shouldn't be for-profit entities. They've been totally irresponsible, proven they can't get the job done. They should be public utilities that operate for public benefit at cost.
So let's get into kind of the Green Party in general right now. One of the things that I see right now is no matter what happens in 2020, I feel like this is a big moment for the Green Party. If Bernie Sanders ends up being the nominee for the Democrats, now you have somebody who I would say is a bigger ally to the Greens than we've ever seen, approaching the White House before, at least in my lifetime. If he is not, and people are given the absolutely abysmal choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, you're going to have a whole new group of people of all ages, but especially young people, and especially some people who are just waking up politically that are going to be looking around for an answer, because they're going to be like, neither of these two horrific choices speak for me. There is a serious problem. I have only known recession my entire frickin' life. What is an answer for me? Is the answer out there? Socialism isn't a dirty word for me. So what is kind of your strategy and the Green Party strategy to get a lot of those people to say the Green Party's for me?
Well, first, with the Sanders scenario, if he somehow pulls out the nomination, which is not looking likely at this point, you know, we will be his best allies, because the first people, because he should crush Trump. I mean, Trump is incompetent, a liar, serial sexual assaulter, racist, failed businessman. I mean, he's a target-rich environment, and I think Bernie would bring that out. So, assuming he's president, the first people he's going to run into before he even gets to the Republicans are Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who are center-right corporate neoliberals. They're not for Bernie's Medicare for all. They're not for his Green New Deal. So he's going to need allies. And, you know, the Green Party, being on the outside, we put pressure on the Democratic Party because their progressives can be taken for granted inside the Democratic Party if there's not an option for them outside, you know, say in congressional races. So, you know, Bernie's an ally for us on some of these issues. I think even more so, we would be an ally for the things he wants to get done, like Medicare for all and the Green New Deal. But I think what we're more likely to see is a miserable choice between Joe Biden, a neoliberal hawk, and Donald Trump, a racist incompetent. And I think a lot of people are going to come our way. And so what we need to do in this coronavirus environment where we can't be out on the streets is find a way for them to participate, which is going to be online, on the phones, and getting ready for when we can go back out on the streets. And what I've been saying is, the reason we're running for president, I've been saying the Green Party has to build from the bottom up. We have about 150 local elected officials, but there are about 500,000 elected offices in this country. So we just got a toehold in this thing. We should be electing thousands of people as we go into the 2020s, because the Democrats and Republicans are not solving the most basic problems: the climate crisis, the new nuclear arms race, and the inequality crisis. I mean, inequality kills. Life expectancies for the working class are going down. And that's just inexcusable in a country as wealthy as this. So we have answers for that. And so I think we need to be electing thousands, the local office, and then state legislatures, and then Congress. And then when we have somebody in Congress, a caucus there, our green presidential ticket will be hard to ignore. So running for president gets us ballot lines. About 40 of the states, whether the Green Party has a ballot line in the next election cycle depends on how many votes we get in the presidential race. And in most states, that's 1%, 2%, or 3%. So if we can do that and get those ballot lines, we'll be in a good position in the 2020s to build from the bottom up and become a major force and a major party in American politics. That's our goal.
And how do you kind of expand the numbers, though? Like as far as just widening the tent, and I hate to use that phrase because that's something you hear from Nancy Pelosi, and that's not what I mean. But as far as just the numbers, more people coming into the Greens. I mean, you know, one of the things that you hear as a criticism of the Greens that I think is worth exploring is people are like, well, gee, why is it something like the DSA is growing so fast and in all these numbers, and the Green Party does not seem to be growing as much, comparatively speaking? First of all, do you agree with that assessment? And second of all, if so, well, why is that? Or why do you think that is?
Yeah, DSA has benefited a lot from Sanders' campaign and popularizing the word socialism, no doubt about it. I think DSA is structured as a membership organization, and I, for a long time, have said the Green Party should be a real political party like there are in other countries. I mean, the Democrats and Republicans are not parties where you have to agree to some principles and support it as a rank-and-file member. The rich folks buy the party. They pay for it. And you are atomized. You don't go to your local Democratic precinct meeting or county committee meeting to talk about how we're going to fight fracking, because the leaders are for fracking, but you just don't do that in those meetings. They don't deal with issues and organizing. We need a party that does. And so we should have a party with local chapters, and it gets represented through the state and national level through proportionally according to the number of members they have. And that's something I've written a lot about a long time, and was working on with Bruce Dixon, the late editor of Black Agenda Report. And unfortunately, he had cancer, and it caught up with him last summer. So I think that's what we need to do, to have a structure to which people can join. Right now, you join a political party by telling the state, I want this ballot, or I'm going to register in this party. and you're not connected to the organization. So it's very easily manipulated from the top down because people are atomized. They don't talk to each other. They get talked at by, these entrepreneurial candidate organizations. It's really like a capitalist market. The candidates go to the fat cats and say, invest in our project, and some of them get invested in, and then they're the ones that are in the primaries seen as serious, and they've been pre-selected by the rich folks. And then we get to choose, what the rich folks have already chosen for us, between what they've already chosen for us. We need a party where people can go to their local meeting and talk the issues through and make their own decisions and act and speak for themselves. And I think that's a place where we can grow at the grassroots and have a place for everybody to participate.
So one of the things that that your people wanted to do here when they reached out to me was kind of clarify some foreign policy issues. You've said you've had some takes, particularly on Russiagate, that, considering how that has been weaponized against the left, was very concerning to hear. You've had some other statements on your website that kind of contradicts certain things you have said publicly. So would you like to clear the air on that once and for all? Where are you at on Russiagate? Is there anything you've said in the past that you think you should retract?
Well, Russiagate usually refers to the democratic narrative that whatever the Russians did in 2016 justifies escalating the Cold War with Russia, excuses Clinton's loss to Trump, and justifies censorship. And I don't agree with any of those conclusions. My policy toward Russia is we need to engage them diplomatically instead of be provoking them with huge war games right on their border, continuing to push NATO in their face, not negotiating with them on the New START treaty, which expires next February 5th. That's the last bilateral treaty between the United States and Russia on nuclear arms. So we need to talk to Russia. We got common problems: the climate, the nuclear arms race. We're both involved in proxy wars in Ukraine and Syria. We should be talking to each other instead of at each other through, these different measures that were taken. So that's number one. Clinton, well, first of all, Trump was the loser. He lost the popular vote. The Electoral College elected Trump. The Russians didn't do that. So Clinton's got to stop that. Black voter suppression, that goes back to, the 2000 race and the Bush brothers and their lackeys in Florida, disenfranchising blacks and that close, Electoral College outcome. So black voter suppression, the Russians didn't do that. And the Democrats, should look in the mirror and decide, let's do the things we can do something about, which is get rid of the Electoral College. And they're worried about the Greens spoiling the vote. Let's have a ranked choice national popular vote for president. So that deals with that. And then the idea that because the Russians may have done some stuff trying to influence the outcome here, and I think there was some of that, the degree we can argue over, but that doesn't draw the conclusion that therefore anybody who says something agreeable to the Russian point of view, like I just say about NATO, or, Putin does want to negotiate the New START and Trump won't. I've been called a Russian asset too, as well as a Russian gator. And, I don't want to get into the name calling's beside the point. The question is what the policy is. So, I don't know what else you want me to say about the Russia question, but those are my viewpoints.
Well, I think in particular, there were some statements you made on the show Primo Nutmeg that were, pretty disappointing to hear, especially from someone in your position. Again, I mean, the Russia hysteria, they basically had a 3-year distractathon over a couple memes that were intended to spam people, some of which came out even after the election. And, you see the way this has been weaponized against Black Lives Matter, how it has been weaponized against DAPL, how it has been weaponized against activists, how it has been weaponized brutally against your colleague Jill Stein. And, when you kind of genuflect at that altar, it's very concerning to hear. So I guess in particular, do you retract some of those statements you made on Primo Nutmeg?
I was kind of disjointed on Primo Nutmeg. It was like 70 minutes into an interview and I was hungry. I got up at 3 in the morning. So like I remember one point I was asked about the Mueller report and I said, you know, it was full of, you know, references to collusion. In other words, contacts between Russians and Trump people. It's over 100 of them. And then I blurted out, I think Trump should be impeached. Now, what I had in mind was the obstruction of justice and other things, the emoluments, the self-enrichment, the nepotism, that blatant racism. I mean, I think by that point, Al Green had already put his article of impeachment on for Trump's racism. I mean, the guy's a rap sheet a mile long. So, you know, in the context, some of the stuff I said may have not come across the way I intended to. But, you know, my view is, look, the GRU does what they do, just like the CIA does what they do. You know, back in, or I think it was early 2015, we had slapped sanctions, Magnitsky Act sanctions on Russia. And then they took over Crimea. And then we added more sanctions. And then we found out the Russians had got into the State Department and NSC and got a bunch of documents. And the NSC came to Obama and said, we need to slap back hard. And Obama, who's trying to get this deal working with Russia on Iran, the nuclear deal, said, well, we would do the same thing. That's what we do. I mean, to me, it's like, if you ever read Mad Magazine, you know, and on the margins, it's spy versus spy.
Yeah, you know, Howie, despite what Pete Buttigieg says, a lot of us millennials do know Mad Magazine. He was out of line when he suggested, I don't know if you remember that, but yeah, Pete Buttigieg.
I missed that, but yeah, I loved Mad Magazine as a kid.
Sorry.
You know, but spy versus spy is going on around the margins, while, you know, whatever else is going on isn't really paying attention to that. So this goes on in the background. Now, I think one thing we can do, information warfare is a problem, I believe. You know, when the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moved their clock to 100 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been, because of climate change and the nuclear arms race, and they said information warfare, because these states, and it's all sides, are putting out this misinformation, disinformation, false leads. It's making it hard for publics to come together to get clear about what they want to demand their governments to do. I think it's the big problem. There were initiatives from Russia in the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and the Trump administration to negotiate a cyber treaty to avoid this information war, this cyber war. And the U.S. rebuffed them every time. And I think that's because they arrogantly think they can beat the Russians at this. So, and we know they have. The New York Times reported how we infiltrated Russia's power grid. We did the Stuxnet thing, I think it was called, in Iran, and destroyed a bunch of their fuselages. I mean, we're doing this stuff all the time, too. And I think we need treaties regarding cyber war, just like we do with regular arms, where you have inspection and mutual inspection and verification.
Wouldn't you say, though? I mean, it's kind of, you know, you talk about information warfare. You look at the media structure in the United States, which, by the way, in a lot of other countries, what we do is not legal. Our media structure wouldn't be legal in Norway, as it shouldn't be here. We have a complete corporate giveaway of news and information. Comcast has no business being in news. Meanwhile, they own MSNBC. Jeff Zucker, by his own admission, has no interest in news. Meanwhile, he's up there with CNN, along with Time Warner. Fox News is just a Rupert Murdoch wet dream. Isn't that far more problematic than some memes on the internet?
I don't want to rank how problematic it is. It's very problematic for us here in the United States. And we got to do something about that. We need massive media reform. We need to break up the big media conglomerates. We need to have a lot more independent ownership. We need to have public support for independent but democratically accountable public media. We hardly have any investigative reporting going on locally anymore because the newspapers are going broke and the networks don't provide. You know, you used to go out for a news conference and there'd be a person with the camera and there'd be the reporter. Now the reporter's got the camera over their shoulder and they ask you, what the hell's going on? What am I doing here? And you got to explain it to them so they can ask you questions. It's crazy. So we need to support investigative journalism. That's going to require public money with independent bodies, maybe picked like you pick juries by random to oversee the operation. I think, you know, there's a massive, because right now we get basically, you know, the mainstream corporate media, which is leaning Democratic these days, but they aren't they aren't hostile to Republicans, except they're hostile to Trump. And then Fox and you know, right-wing talk radio, which is all over rural America. I've been driving through rural America, man. You can't get NPR in some places. You just get, you know, Rush Limbaugh and Christian radio. So we need major media reform so that we have lots of sources of information, lots of real investigation. And
well, the problem too is that they all uphold the status quo. I mean, that's the kind of bigger forest here. You know, I mean, you talk about impeaching Trump, and the impeachment charade was nothing more than a circus. We don't disagree on how corrupt Trump is. Trump is corrupt to all hell. It's absolutely disgusting that he is president. However, while this impeachment circus was going on, they handed him gift after gift. One of those gifts was a brand new NATO that nobody talked about. He got that, or excuse me, a brand new NAFTA. Sorry, misspoke there. Brand new NAFTA that nobody talked about, that kind of just went through. They cut food stamps from about 800,000 people. They expanded his spying powers. And that's why a lot of this stuff is just straight up nauseating for a lot of people to see. It's absolutely nauseating to hear a corporate grifter like Adam Schiff talk about how Trump is a traitor and treasonous and this and that. And then the guy votes to expand his spying power and expand the Patriot Act. It's a game. It's a charade. And I think that, you know, we really need to focus on the big picture here, that this isn't the Republicans versus the Democrats. This isn't, you know, like a meme warfare. This is the have versus the have-nots. And this is the corporatocracy versus the rest of us. And I personally am not interested in giving any more credence to the fake wrestling matches that passes at news on a daily basis in this country.
Yeah, that impeachment hearings were another manifestation of the Democrats' Russia narrative, because instead of getting Trump for what they charged him with, which is obstruction of justice and abuse of power for trying to extort the Ukrainian president, half of what they said was, oh, he didn't give the arms to Ukraine for this proxy war fast enough, and he endangered our national security. You know, the American people, if you wanted to get the American people behind you on impeachment and to get Trump out of there, you would have talked about all the things he has done that has hurt workers and consumers and the environment and world peace. And
well, you would talk about his financial crimes, and they didn't do that. And we both know why. They didn't do that because they're complicit in that stuff too.
And right now, New York has enabled one of those investigative committees to get Trump's New York tax returns. And the Democrat in charge, he's from Eastern or Western Massachusetts, says he's not interested. So, you know, I don't think they were serious about going after Trump because Pelosi was trying to protect her conservative Democrats that got elected in 2018.
And she was trying to protect herself because, you know, a lot of the financial infractions Donald Trump does, she does the same thing. She knew more about Iraq than she let on, you know, so.
Her money comes from real estate like Trump. You know, she's from a big real estate family, which is basically the industry that runs local politics everywhere. That's the foundation for I don't care what city you're in. I mean, Trump was part of the Democratic machine because he's part of the real estate industry in New York City where he ran for president.
It's almost like it's a big club and we ain't in it. I think George Carlin said that.
Yeah. I heard that recently. I mean, reheard that rant. It's
been around a long time.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, no, the Clintons and the Trumps socialized together till the election in 2016, including their kids.
Sure. So, well, then getting big picture here to close out, what do you kind of see as the way forward? How big picture do we kind of, you know, break up the corporate duopoly to have a better picture of electoral politics in our country, which is the lane you've chosen as a Green Party candidate?
I think the left, particularly this new socialist movement, has to declare their political independence. I mean, there have been two efforts now with Bernie Sanders to try to get the nomination and reform the Democratic Party. And that's been going back for over 100 years. I mean, the populist movement disappeared when, you know, they cross-endorsed William Jennings Bryan, and in 1896. So we need to act and speak for ourselves. If you look at the public opinion polling, the things that we're talking about, like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, have overwhelming support. But we can't get them through the Democratic Party. We need to independently take that program to the people without getting all mixed up with the corporate money and power that makes the Democratic Party an impossible environment in which to advance those reforms. So I think the way forward is for the left to decide we need to build a new party. And the Green Party has a lot of ballot lines, and we'll welcome people in. And of course, new people will, shape its future. So, I urge people to look at that option, because you're beating your head bloody against the brick wall called the Democratic Party. And we got, the climate crisis, the new nuclear arms race, the inequality that is, making life so hard for, at least the bottom half of our people on the income spectrum. Basic problems. They complain the Greens are spoiling the election. Ranked choice, national popular vote for president. That answer we've been giving them for 20 years. The Democrats haven't picked it up because they would rather, in fact, here in New York, in the dead of night, as part of the state budget, it's a very austere budget that Governor Cuomo got through. He's getting a lot of attention as kind of a take charge guy compared to the bumbling Trump. But in the background, he just attached to that a law that will increase by 2.5 times the number of votes. The Green Party will need to keep the ballot, and if we lose it, then we got to get 3 times more signatures, from 15,000 to 45,000 in a 6-week window. It's a plan to kill third parties, and he's doing that under the cover of the coronavirus. So, when the Democrats get on their high horse about the Russians, I say, with Democrats like Cuomo, who needs Russians?
Well, yeah, he also, he's getting pat on the back right now. Meanwhile, he cut Medicaid, and yeah, it's a complete mess. But so, well, going on that answer though, you're saying it's like we need to coalesce, we need a new party. So do you see it as kind of the place of the Green Party is to sort of, don't you see it as kind of like your guys' lane is to convince all of these lefty groups, the DSA, the SA, and all these lefties that the answer, as far as a political party is concerned, is the Green Party? Do you see it that way, or?
Yeah, but I believe in organizing the people, not trying to organize the left, particularly the organized left, because they have organizational interests, and lefties can split hairs, whereas the people, they got some basic needs, healthcare, housing, income, jobs, a clean environment. And I think we can build a mass base. We're going to need a mass base. The left is not a mass base. It's a small group. Now, I welcome the lefties in. A lot of them have good, theoretical background and understanding of society. And part of what we need to do, besides mobilizing people around immediate demands, is helping them understand why capitalism is stealing wealth you create, and why it's a system of endless growth that's inevitably going to destroy the environment. And, socialism is economic democracy, not autocracy. And, their basic political education, things like that, that's what a party can do. A party is a place where people can come together and find their common interests that can link the different issues. The problem we got now is we have a lot of nonprofits that, if you look at where the funding comes from, it comes from billionaires. There's the Lewises and the Soros and so forth on the left, and the Koch brothers and the Mercers on the right. But the people that decide, what their base is going to do are staffers that are hired and sit around a table and make the decisions. And then we get our orders over the internet. What we need is a place where we can come together at the base and think for ourselves, act for ourselves. And that's what a party can do, and find our common interests. We're divided within the working class along occupational lines. Are you in a big company with a union and a good contract? Are you in a small business with no protections? Are you in the welfare or the prison system, where some workers are the clients and some workers are the supervisors? But they're all workers, and they're both victimized by the system. How do we find common ground? Not to mention the racial divisions and the geographic divisions. So that's why we need a party. A party like the left invented this kind of party back in the 1800s when they were fighting for the ballot in Europe. And like take England, the Whigs and the Tories. The Whigs were funded by the emerging business and professional class, the Tories by the landed elites. And so rich people in both those camps would fund their parties. They were top down. And then what became the Labor Party said, Well, we're going to have to compete politically and fight for the ballot. And when we get it, fight for votes by paying for this ourselves, because rich people don't want us to have any power. And so they said, we got to do with our party like we do with our unions. We pay dues. And they built local chapters and build a, strong party from that. That's what we got to do. And I think, people say, well, the electoral system means you can't do it in this country. Well, there have been plurality, single plurality winner systems where third parties have got a foothold. Canada, they totally blew up the two-party system in Venezuela. Mexico, England has third parties, even though they have this, single plurality winner system. Of course, we want to change that, but it's not an insurmountable barrier. I think the biggest barrier is that the left has for nearly 100 years now been trying to get what it wants through the capitalist party called the Democrats. And let's draw the lesson. It hasn't worked.
So where can people go to learn more about you and your campaign?
The best place would be to go to my website, www.howiehawkins.us, HOWIEHAWKINS.us. And from there, you can find out, what we're saying, how to get involved, how to donate money. There are links to the Facebook and Twitter and all that on the website. So it's howiehawkins.us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate being on. It's good to talk to you.
Cheers. Be well.
You too.
All right. There you have it. That was Howie Hawkins. And we are out of time. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview. And again, to learn more about Howie Hawkins, go to howiehawkins.us, one of the candidates for the Green Party.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your